Brothers and sisters, last Sunday we have one of our smaller group ministries here at St. Mary's. It's our Young in Faith group, where we meet in the home of one of the parishioners and have a little dinner and have a discussion about topics. And our discussion last week was on the Orthodox approach to social action, I guess is one way of summarizing it. And the question was asked, what is the Orthodox approach to charitable acts, to caring for others? What should be our position? And I'll share now what I shared then, and it comes from this gospel, of course, and that it must be personal. That it's wonderful if a society can provide for its citizenry in all of their needs and comforts and so forth. But for the sake of the Christian who is seeking to serve the Lord, the Christian is called to an even higher standard. And that is the standard of personal attention, personal care, direct acts of love. And that's what we see described here in the Gospel of St. Matthew, in the Last Judgment, the description of the Last Judgment by the Lord. That those from all the nations, Christians and non-Christians alike, are assembled together and separated by virtue of how they lived a godly life. What do I mean by a godly life? Did they go to church a lot? Did they say all the right prayers? Did they confess the right creeds? Did they have wonderful moments of conversion that convinced them in their heart that they needed Jesus? It's not what Jesus describes. Jesus says, were you blessed? Were you blessed of my Father? Were you like my Father? Were you merciful as he is merciful? Did you show kindness as he shows kindness? And he described the ways in which that happens, and you know them, right? To feed, to give drink, to clothe, to visit. These are humble and simple things, but they are profoundly intimate. Notice that even though you could argue there's an economic quality to certain of those, because you have to expend your own resources in some way to do them, they're not monetary. They do not directly equate to a monetary contribution to any organization or government. They require a personal and intimate involvement with the person you're trying to help, though. You clothed me. You fed me. You gave me to drink. Not somebody did it on your behalf through a representational government or something like that, or through a monumental charity organization that you donated to. Those are good things to do. Don't get me wrong. Don't stop doing those. And if you're not doing those, you probably should do more of those. But what God is looking for us is, are we merciful in our own life, in our own interactions with people? When the Gospels were being written, this could hit home because people were sensitive to the struggling and the suffering of the poor around them. The parable of the rich man and Lazarus, for example, that we read just a few weeks ago. The man was dying on the doorstep of the rich man. In American society today, we would call the police, and the police would come and take them to somewhere else, so we wouldn't have to see them. But if you go to a country that is predominantly poor, maybe just south of the border, you will see that the poor and the rich live very close to one another, and they see one another. They could even live right next door to each other, almost on the doorstep, as it were. But we now live in a very insulated and isolated world, in this postmodern world of ours. We barely even know our own next-door neighbors. Either we live in a condo or we have a nice acre around us. We still, doesn't matter, we don't know our neighbors. We know people who live across the world because we Skype with them or talk with them on the internet or something like that, but we don't actually know the people right around us in our own communities. We don't know the suffering poor that are right next door, right in our suburbs, in our churches, in our schools, in our workplaces. We might know the panhandler that we see on the way into work. And then if we give them something, we feel good and we pat ourselves on the back and say, see, I'm a Christian. That's a good thing to do to help the person who's in need. But is that really what the gospel is calling us to? Is that really what Jesus Christ expects us when he says, be merciful as your Father in heaven is merciful? We have to be intimate. We have to be personal. We have to know the other person and treat them as a human being with fullness, just as we would if they were our own brother or sister. And we can't do that for every single person in the world. That's, of course, true. But we can do it for the people that are around us. But we can't do it for anyone if we live isolated lives. We can't do it for anyone if we are insulated from the realities of the poverty that are in our own counties, even the wealthiest counties in the world that we live in. So, it was a wonderful gift from God, providentially, that on the Monday after we had this talk at our Young in Faith, almost all of us who were there, the majority of us who were there, actually, kind of thanks to Christina, doing a lot of networking, got us all to meet with a representative from Focus, the Fellowship of Orthodox Christians United to Serve. And they're looking at seeing what they can do in the Washington, D.C. area. And so I think that was a sign from God that it's time. There are churches, each church has its own gifts. Some churches have the space that they can give to organizational activities. Some churches have the money that they can give. Our church is God, Spirit, and energy, and dedication, and people who take their faith seriously. So I hope that at least what we can do is get involved with as a church community, being more involved on a personal and intimate and human level with doing good for those in our community. We're good, we're really good here at acute appeals, acute afflictions. Somebody is in need of something, we'll rise to the occasion. Somebody brings something to our attention, we'll rise to the occasion. But this is the problem. We don't necessarily go out unless somebody comes to us. That's not good enough. It's not good enough for a church to just be a reaction-based community. It has to be proactive. It has to be making a difference in the community. And I know all of you are involved in making our world a better place. If you weren't, you wouldn't be members of this community, because you'd say, I don't want to hear these kind of messages that convict my conscience and make me feel guilty. No, I know you're already involved. You serve our nation, either through the military or through the government or through some other form. You're improving our community. I know that you all are. But we as a church, I think, need to come together this year and really start getting dedicated to doing it in a more systematic fashion, but at the same time a more personal, hands-on fashion. If we can do both, then I think we're really doing something great. God grant us to be able to do it. That's my prayer for our church this year in particular. And as we begin Great Lent is coming. Next Monday, in 8 days, Great Lent starts, so it's upon us. Remember that we fast from all those rich foods, from dairy, from meat, and we live a very Spartan life, and we pray a lot more, and we spend less time entertaining ourselves, not just so that we can feel miserable and unhappy and go through withdrawal from all of our rich foods, but so that we can actually take that energy that we are spending on ourselves in self-indulgence and redirect it towards others. The whole purpose of the church celebrating the entirety of Great Lent, the 40 days of Lent, was so that we could live in solidarity with our brothers who are preparing for baptism. We need to also realize we're living in solidarity with those who are suffering when we take on the cross of Great Lent, as a way to strengthen us actually for the rest of the year, to give us that golden standard to live by. So I hope that throughout this Great Lent you will realize that Lent is not just prayer and fasting, but it's also about doing well to others, feeding the hungry, giving those who are thirsty something to drink, both literally and symbolically. We don't have too many problems finding a cold glass of water in the world today in this country, but in many countries they don't. But here there's a lot of thirst for a lot of things that people need. Human conversation, human relationship, compassion, understanding. Don't people thirst for these things too? Are they hungry for justice? Are they hungry to see truth spoken from those who call themselves Christians in a way that is loving and kind and firm? Should we not clothe the naked, not only by getting rid of those extra clothes in our closet that we don't really need, we're not even using, but also covering over the nakedness of the people around us by clothing them with good words, with kindness, not with starting fights, not with antagonizing people, with judging people with our thoughts, but clothing them in prayer, with loving kindness, with deeds that raise their dignity, the dignity of their humanity in the image of God who created them. And the sick. How many of us, we hear about people who are sick. We say, oh, that's terrible. But do we actually take the time to pick up the phone even? To give them a call and say, hey, I haven't seen you. How are you? I heard you weren't feeling well. I'm praying for you. I'm here for you. Can I bring you a dish? Can I make you some macaroni and cheese? Whatever. Even if somebody's sick and Lent, you can make them mac and cheese. Don't eat yourself. But give them. They'll appreciate it. Because they need the strength. And even those who are in prison, most of us don't know any felons or people that are serving time. It's a lot harder to go visit those in prison unless you're involved in some kind of official ministry or official capacity. But there are many people who are imprisoned by many other things. Maybe they're imprisoned by weakness. Maybe they can't go traveling. Maybe they're stuck at home, they're shut in. Maybe an illness has got them, just like the sick. Maybe it's a mental illness. Maybe it's somebody who can't live the life that they would like to lead because they've suffered, they've been traumatized, they have some kind of disorder. But everybody kind of backs away from them and says, well, it's too bad for them, but I really don't know what I can do for them. Yeah, I know what you can do. Call them up, spend some time, talk with them. Treat them like a dignified human being again. Remind them of what it means to have normal human relationship. Even if they can't fully participate in it, you're doing a kindness unto Christ in the spirit of the gospel of the Last Judgment. And there are a lot of people in that position that are in our communities that are just 2 feet away from you sometimes. Sometimes people imprisoned by their own thoughts, unable to get forward in their life because of their fears or their doubts, their anxieties, their resentment. Visit them, clothe them, feed them. Brothers and sisters, let us make this Lent a time of renewal for our church and for our community and for our broader community around us. Get to know your neighbors. Stop hiding behind politeness and pleasantries. Step out of yourself and love. Christ is Let us say with our whole soul and our whole mind, let us say, Lord Almighty God of our fathers, we pray thee, hear us and have mercy. Have mercy on us, O God. Like a dignified human being again. Remind them of what it means to have normal human relationship. Even if they can't fully participate in it, you're doing a kindness unto Christ in the spirit of the gospel of the Last Judgment. And there are a lot of people in that position that are in our communities that are just 2 feet away from you sometimes. Sometimes people imprisoned by their own thoughts, unable to get forward in their life because of their fears or their doubts, their anxieties, their resentment. Visit them, clothe them, feed them. Brothers and sisters, let us make this Lent a time of renewal for our church and for our community and for our broader community around us. Get to know your neighbors. Stop hiding behind politeness and pleasantries. Step out of yourself and love. Christ is Let us say to our whole soul and our whole mind, let us say, Lord Almighty God of our fathers, we pray thee, hear us and have mercy. Have mercy on us, O God. Like a dignified human being again. Remind them of what it means to have normal human relationship. Even if they can't fully participate in it, you're doing a kindness unto Christ in the spirit of the gospel of the Last Judgment. And there are a lot of people in that position that are in our communities that are just 2 feet away from you sometimes. Sometimes people imprisoned by their own thoughts, unable to get forward in their life because of their fears or their doubts, their anxieties, their resentment. Visit them, clothe them, feed them. Brothers and sisters, let us make this Lent a time of renewal for our church and for our community and for our broader community around us. Get to know your neighbors. Stop hiding behind politeness and pleasantries. Step out of yourself and love. Christ is